The thing that people often say about Nick Bolton, though, is that there's a lot of unseen things that he does that provide more importance than people realize, right? All the things that Steve Spagnuolo says about him, about being so important to the defense, about, the quarterback of the defense, that sort of thing. And so my thought on this was if what people aren't willing to do with Bolton is just look at the film and make a decision on what kind of player he is based on that alone, which is a good, not great player, I thought, well, if he's really doing all these things that are so important to the defensive success, well, he missed 7 games last year and was largely, his role was basically entirely substituted by Drew Tranquill, who is commonly, this was in the AFC Championship. That's the kind of thing I'm talking about. And this isn't to pick on Nick Bolton. This is a good example of just having a little bit of an athletic limitation, right? If he gets isolated in space against running backs, he can struggle. And that's not to say he's a bad player. It's just one area he struggles. Hollywood Brown's not a contested catch guy. Non-elite guys are not great at everything. That's just how it works. So what I set out to do, Drew Tranquill subbed in for Nick Bolton basically entirely in his role when Bolton was injured, except for the Green Bay game when both were hurt. And so you had a 7-game sample of the Chiefs with Bolton, and then a 7-game sample where Bolton was being replaced by Tranquill. And so what I did is I looked at expected points added, which is a primer of that for your viewers. Expected points added per play is just a measure of how good a job did you do moving the ball in a way that will help the team score. So an easy example of this is 5 yards isn't 5 yards all the time. It's not the same thing on every down. 5 yards on 3rd and 4 is much more of a big deal than 5 yards on 3rd and 15. So expected points added accounts for that. How much more likely are you to score after the play ends? So that's a long road to a short thought of saying it's one of the better measurements of how well a team performed. So what I did in a nutshell is I looked at how good a job the Chiefs did with Bolton and without Bolton in holding teams below their normal expected points added per play. And what I found, in a nutshell, is that there was really no evidence that Bolton's absence hurt them. They actually performed a little bit better in holding teams below their average. With Bolton, I think it was like 4 out of 7 or 3 out of 7 teams, 4 out of 7 teams, 4 out of 7. They held them below their EPA per play in the pass game, like 3 in the run. It was actually 5 without him and 5 against the pass and 4 against the run. So again, these are really, it's a surface level thing, but the short story is statistically, what a lot of people will say is, well, the yards per play went up in games Bolton wasn't there, but you have to isolate for the offenses they were playing. It's a much bigger deal, like to hold the Eagles to 5 yards per play than to hold the Raiders to 5 yards per play, right? You got to isolate for the team that you're playing. And when you do that, you really can't find statistical evidence that Bolton was missed. Now, does that mean he's a bad player? No. Does that mean it's dispositive? No, that's only a 7-game sample size. Football's a weird sport. He also happened to have a very competent backup in Drew Tranquill. The question that I want people to ask themselves is this. Drew Tranquill just signed for 3 years, I want to say $18, $19 million. If you can get a relatively equivalent performance for that amount of money, what are you willing to pay Nick Bolton? Because it's all about value over replacement. So the article goes into a lot more detail and makes everything that I just said that didn't make sense, hopefully make sense. But that's one of the things that I love to attack is what's the narrative versus do we have evidence for it? Because when people say, hey, Nick Bolton is as important to this defense as Chris Jones, maybe, I don't know. But what's the evidence for it? And we have to look. And if we can't find evidence for it, we have to ask ourselves, are we just believing things just to believe them?